been asked, why is your hair long? Well, I went through this whole calculation at one point. I went to get a haircut. It took about an hour, 15 minutes to drive over there, 30 minutes, 15 minutes to drive back. So I calculated in my head, if I did this every month for the next year, basically I was giving up a year of my life to get my hair cut. So I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. So that's how I ended up with long hair. I do like flip-flops. Anybody got any questions before we go on? These are the important things. I did work on a book one time, got translated into Chinese. That was kind of cool. I'm in a couple of little clubs, and that's how you get a hold of me. I'll put that back up at the end with an email address. And if you have questions or you want to talk, happy to trade emails. So I don't mind that at all. Okay, so SQL Translation Framework. So what is it? It's a new feature of 12c, so it came out in release 1. It provides the capability to translate SQL on the fly, transparently, right? So as a DBA, if you've got an application and you don't like the SQL that's being run, you can actually go behind the scenes and say, I want to take this SQL statement, and instead of running that SQL statement, I want to run this other SQL statement that I give it. Okay? Does that sound like a cool feature? Does it sound like a dangerous feature? Yeah, it's a really dangerous feature, and I'll show you in a little bit. There's not a lot of checks that go on this stuff, so you can basically really screw around with things. It came out of development for the SQL Developer product, so the SQL Developer team built this translation capability. The main reason that they built it was they wrote it so that they could easily port applications from other databases. So basically, and there's some pre-built frameworks. So Sybase, for example, there's a Sybase framework that basically is supposed to let you run a Sybase application on Oracle without having to rewrite any of the code, right? Does that make sense? So there's a couple pieces to it. We'll talk about them here real quick. But the developers got smart and decided, hey, this is a pretty cool feature. Maybe we ought to just open it up and let normal human beings have access to it. So they basically have a package that you can call to build these things yourself. All right, so you can build a couple of different ways, and I'll show you how those things work. All right, so why am I interested? I'm interested because occasionally I get called in on performance issues, and occasionally it's not easy to change the code, right? That's one of the main issues. And there are some sets of problems that really the only way to address them is to change the SQL itself, right? So if any of you guys have heard me talk before about these hint-based mechanisms, we've got these things, baselines and SQL profiles that allow us to apply hints to a SQL statement behind the scenes. And a lot of times that is enough to get a better plan, or to sort of lock in a plan if we have multiple plans that are getting generated and we want to do stability sort of things. That's a technique that we've used for a long time. However, there are some sets of problems that we just can't fix with hints, right? And so this SQL translation framework allows us to basically rewrite SQL on the fly and solves another set of problems that we couldn't address before. Okay. Any questions about sort of the basics of how it works? Okay, so here's a coolness piece about it. In the migration guide, there's actually a blurb in there about what the developers thought about it with some of the other hint-based mechanisms, SQL profiles in particular. The developers, although they provided an interface to generate those things yourself, they didn't intend for people to use it, right? Although they published a way to do it, they didn't really document it, and they certainly didn't intend for people to go out and build their own SQL profiles. With this translation framework, they actually thought about it, and in the documentation they said, hey, here's another cool thing about this. It's not just for doing translation, but you can actually use it to substitute one Oracle SQL statement for another Oracle statement just to address semantic or performance issues. Right? So this is documented and something that you can actually use with their blessing, as opposed to going behind the scenes and doing something that wasn't really necessarily designed to do that. So this is well documented. And I don't know why that's coming up first. Probably because my stuff is not lined up very well. So let's talk about the basic mechanics. Basic mechanics, there's three basic things that we have to do. One, we have to create this thing called a profile, which is a term that Oracle has used for about 18 things, so we could use it yet again. And then we have a translation profile. That profile can consist of a couple of different things. One thing it can consist of is a PL SQL translator package. So those frameworks that I'm talking about, like the Sybase one, is basically a PL SQL bunch of code that says if I see this sort of a pattern in a SQL statement, I'm going to replace it with this sort of a pattern, that conforms to the Oracle syntax as opposed to the Sybase syntax. Make sense? So we also have the ability to write our own PL SQL packages. So I know some guys that are using advanced rewrite to change SQL statements on the fly. In 12, they may find that writing this PL SQL thing with a SQL translator works better. And I'll show you why. There's a lot of restrictions and flakiness about the DBMS advanced rewrite that don't exist in the SQL translation stuff. Okay. Second thing that we can add is mappings. So I can basically take a SQL statement and then write another SQL statement and just have a one-to-one mapping of those things. Right? And actually, I don't have to have a PL SQL translator if I don't want. I can just have mappings in my profile. All right, so what do you think that would be useful for? Anybody? Kent's going to say something. Injection. Yep. So basically, if I can map one SQL statement to another, if I've got the ability to do that, I can basically do anything I want. Right? So I can change a SQL statement because it's performing badly. If a rewrite of the SQL statement would perform better, that's one thing that I can do. If there's if I want to be mean or bad, I could also do something sort of nefarious with this, right? I could return wrong data. I could pull data from a different table, right? So there's lots of good and bad uses for it, right?
But anyway. Selected to insert? Did you turn a select into an insert?
Mr. Millsap wants to know if you can turn a select into an insert. The answer is no, nor can you turn a select into a delete. It has to be, which was one of the first things I wanted to try. But it wouldn't let me do that. It gives me an error message if I do that. But I can change any select statement into any other select statement. So I'll show you some of the restrictions on the DBMS advanced rewrite. In that implementation of a similar sort of functionality, I have to have the same select list. The select list has to match in number of items and in character or the data types, right? And if I don't give it the right data types, I get an error message that says, hey, these two SQL statements are not compatible. Those restrictions do not apply to this thing. This thing basically, so my programmer brain says, well, when they wrote that thing, they basically did some part of the parse ahead of time, building the cursor. Once they already had the cursor built, they couldn't, change the select list because the data's got to come back into a structure that's already set up, right? This thing appears to be at the very front end before it even does any parsing whatsoever. It just replaces the text. So I can have different column lists, different data types in the select list, different tables, different where clauses, anything about it can be different. Yes, you can change the column names, you can do anything. You put hints in it, you put, whatever you want to do, right? Basically it's just going to say, hey, I found this SQL statement. I found it in my set of SQL statements that I've done a mapping for this profile. Replace it and, parse it or run it. Right?
Bind variables.
I haven't actually played with it with bind variables, so I'm not sure how that would. But I bet you have to have. I'm going to say I bet you have to have matching, but probably not. Actually, now that I think about it, because I think it's just way in the front, right? So if you've got a program that's built bind variables, as long as those bind variables exist in your program that's running it, that should work, even if you only use one bind variable instead of two or whatever. But that's something to test. I haven't actually tested that with bind variables.
If you have advanced auditing and checking on someone looking at the table, will it fire on the initial query statement or the one you rewrite?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that it would fire on the rewritten one, because when you look in the shared pool, you don't even see any trace of the original SQL statement. You see the rewritten one in the shared pool with all the statistics about it and the plan associated with it.
On that auditing, is there a way to record that this actually took place?
Yeah,
That the
so,
switch took place?
yeah, I'll get to that in a minute,
Okay.
but there is a logging facility that you can go and look at, and there's not any indication in the standard $SQL sort of views that says this was a translation, at least that I've seen so far. There may be something in other XML that would be a good thing to check too. I've got an internet connection here, so after I get through a few of these slides, maybe we'll log on and just run a couple of things and have a look. All right, any other questions before we go any further? All right, last thing you have to do is sort of a weirdo thing. Currently, you have to set this event in order to turn the thing on. So you can do that with an alter session, or you could do it at the database level, I guess, if you wanted to. But that event has to be turned on. Okay. There is a blog entry that I did. This has been around for a while, right? This was back in 2013 that I did this blog post. So whenever 12.101 came out is when this thing first showed up. So it's been around for quite a while. But we don't have too many people on 12 yet. How many of you guys have a production version 12 database now? Yeah, cool, more and more. So I've been asking that question for several years, and this is the biggest audience I've ever seen, so that's cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bounce out to this little blog entry and show you just some of the syntax so you can kind of see what it looks like. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so here's the example, and this is when I needed the pointer. Now, wait a minute. Small enough to see. This may not work. No, it does not work very good. All right, where's the Mac guy that tell me how to get this window on the screen? All right, good. Okay, so here's just a thing off the blog, but basically there's a package called DBMS SQL Translator. It has a bunch of things that you can run in it. One of them is create profile, so it's very simple. You just give it a name. I called mine Foo. Created it. I can select from DBA objects and see that there's a thing up there, and there's an object type now called SQL Translation Profile. To do a mapping, so that's all I have to do. I don't have to create a PL SQL package to go with it if I don't want to. If I just want to do mappings, there's a thing called Register SQL Translation. I have to tell it what profile to attach it to, and then I have to give it the SQL statement that I want, and the one that I want to translate it to is scrolled off the screen. All right, so it's pretty simple syntax. It's actually, you know, for big SQL statements, this is obviously not going to work, right? You're not going to type in a 30-page SQL statement and then type it in. So I've actually got a little script that you just give it a SQL ID, and it pulls the text and builds the, you know, the translation for you. But basically, that's the syntax. Just register translation. This is what I had, and this is what I want to do. Okay. Sorry guys, all these windows on my machine are causing me problems. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, I've got a little script that goes out and looks at the, there's a view called, what is it, DBA, SQL translations, and you can see what's out there, right? So there's an owner, there's a profile name, there's the from text, and there's the to text, right? So you see a few sort of simple looking things here. I can do a delete, and I can change that to another delete. I can't change the select statement to a delete, but I can change one delete to another. So in this case, I'm supposed to be deleting from SKU, and I translate it to delete from dummy, and it actually will run a delete on the dummy table if I type in delete from SKU. So that's pretty cool. Let's see if I can show that to you. Type select to from tool. Okay, so it's, and then if I look to see, you know, what did I just run, you see the statement that it got translated to is what ends up in the shared pool in the plan that you get. Right? And there's no indication here as to, you know, there hasn't been a translation in play. So let me do this to see anything in there that says it was a translation? Nope. So I thought maybe other XML, you guys familiar with other XML? There's this funky column in one of the $B SQL views that has all kinds of funky stuff in it, right? Sometimes they stuff things in there that they haven't actually built into the data dictionary yet. So it's an XML, you know, collection of stuff. So I thought maybe they might have in there, you know, an indication that translation has been applied to the statement, but apparently
Is it
not.
maybe implied by the plan hash 2 thing?
No, plan hash 2. No, plan hash 2 is there for all SQL statements. Nothing about that. So as far as I know, there's no way to figure out if, you know, just from looking in the data dictionary, if there was a translation on SQL statement or not.
Have you ever priced it? Did you see what price? Do you see anything in reverse in that area?
I haven't done a MillSap trace, but I've looked at a bunch of Wolfgang kind of traces, and there's nothing in there about that either. You know, so.
Is the SQL also translated when it is in real SQL?
I haven't tried a PL SQL block either, but we can do that real quick and see what it does. But I expect it's gonna take the text and it's gonna replace it with whatever text you put in. So if it said begin and end and have it in the middle, you could say begin and end and have something else in the middle. Right? But I haven't actually tested that. That's a good question. I don't know. You want to try it? We could try that real quick. right, so I've got this one. Let's create one for select 22 and see if it gets translated. I guess so. Right, so I think I'll do that later because it's too confusing when that settings I'll put on there. Yeah, so let's see, how can I do this? So let's say right. So that's the SQL ID I want. The script that I'm using now prompts for SQL ID because it's just, for most cases, it doesn't make sense to try to type in long select statements. So let's do this. So now I'm going to say add. Right, and then use food. And use that SQL ID to replace. And use replace it with. Okay. So it works. Okay, so that worked. Now if I say choose from dual. No, it's not recursive. It was quite possible that I would have broke it then and nothing else would have worked on this database ever. But I'm feeling bold, you know, I'm hanging out with Tanel now, so I'm not afraid. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation stuff.
If that would have worked, we're really interested to see what happened if you translate it into select two.
Right.
Right, then you have a loop and it would probably never end, then it would blow up, right? I don't know, the developers are pretty bright, so they probably thought of that actually. Okay. Mac is giving me troubles today. Okay, so back to this thing. All right, so there's a way to trace it. I mentioned that. We just set an active and it's going to spit out into the standard trace file. So wherever your trace files go, you know, it's going to start making entries, and they're going to look like that. All right, so if you want to see what's going on with translations, you can actually create a log of them. But again, I don't know how to know that they're going on unless you know look, right? So it's kind of a little bit scary. I showed the translations script already that just pulls from that view, the EBA SQL translations. What else? Oh, so I'm going to digress now a little bit on the materialized view rewrite. So, you know, when Oracle, when you create materialized views, Oracle can say, hey, I realize that we've got a materialized view that pre-joins these set of tables, and Oracle can cost that and say, hey, it's cheaper for me to go after this materialized view. So basically, he rewrites the SQL behind the scenes to use those materialized views. Well, they also expose that interface through this this package, DBMS Advanced Rewrite. Okay, so, and that's been available for a while, since version 10, I think. So this Advanced Rewrite package basically lets you do the same thing that I just showed you with the SQL translation framework, right? Basically map one SQL statement to another. And it's actually, in some ways, it's more powerful because it can take statements that are accessing a set of tables with a certain set of join conditions, And it could be a whole bunch of SQL statements that have that set of characteristics, and it can rewrite all those on the fly to use your materialized view. So there is some slightly more powerful features about it. But it's also pretty flaky, and there's lots of restrictions on it, okay? For example, here's an example. If I say rewrite and I do something like this, then I get a message that says that, right? So basically, my select list in my SQL statement had to match not only in the number of items, but also in the character types of them, right? That is not the case with translation framework. As I said, you can map anything to anything. So there are quite a few restrictions with the advanced rewrite. And in fact, if you look at the error message, it basically tells you, hey, it's got to match. You know, the select list has to match exactly. And as I said, it's flaky. It throws 600 errors fairly often, and you know, it's just not as solid as what the translation framework seems to be. Okay. I think that's about all I have. More questions? Yeah, I created one, and it let me create it. Yeah. Let me see if I can go back to my terminal window. That's not it. That's it. Yeah, so. Disconnected. Oh wait, that's not even showing up on my head. Get back on this window. Doesn't show up anymore. Oh well. Anyway, so what I did on that, you did see a delete, a select to delete. It let me do it, but then actually what you saw was one delete to another. The select to delete, it won't let you do. It'll give you an error message. Same thing if you try to go, you know, an insert to a delete, or you know, something that doesn't match. So what I had was a delete. I can definitely do a delete and translate it to a different delete from a different table. So pretty easy to do.
I think you have select file from Duo, what was translated to select from Duo, not delete from Duo.
I'm looking at it. I don't see that in my. Oh, I do have a select from the Duo, so it must let me create it, but then blow up when I try to execute it. Let me just try it, even though you can't see it. Yeah, it gives you an error that says invalid SQL statement. And then when you do an explain plan, sorry it's not showing up here, but when you do an explain plan, it shows the plan for the delete statement. But it wouldn't let you execute. So, no, that doesn't have anything to do with whether it's a dual table or something else. It's not going to let you do a select to a delete. Hey, there we are, back on that. So if I say, yeah, that's what you get. And if you look at what it actually tried to run, translation is.
But it still says process one row.
What? Oh, in the
plan
statistics.
there, it
Yeah.
still says this one row.
So there was the translation, select file from dual to delete from dual. So again, if I say select file from dual, what I get is that. It's still there, so it didn't actually execute, right? It just gave it there. Ah, that's a good point, maybe so. Let's try it. We'll just do a quick example. Dummy's a real table, not dual, right? So I'm going to translate this one to. Network stuff. There's that one. And we're going to say, okay. Translation for food. Return this select statement. And this delete statement. Right. Oh, yeah.
Done.
Dummy. KSO dummy. Yeah, so still invalid, right? So it wasn't the fact that it was dual, it's just that it won't let me run that.
Can you show the plan though?
Can you show the plan?
Yep. So it actually translated it, it just snared it and threw an error.
Yeah, but you emptied that table before, or didn't you ever run the delete statement?
Yeah, I ran it already,
It
right?
should be zero table.
Yeah, so there's no
Zero
records in it.
rows.
Yeah, no records in the table.
Still the same one.
No, that's just the estimate, right?
Maybe so. Yeah.
Yep.
If you look at
Let's
these
do this
commit.
to, oh,
Didn't commit to delete, so you could do rollback and then do it. Then it would roll back.
very helpful, very helpful. Thank you very much.
If,
I guess you don't use for force matching signature.
I expect it does use signature under the hood. I haven't actually dug into that, but it's probably stores a signature with that text.
You can't use force matching, which is the.
No, there's no force matching option, right? So it's a one-to-one matching.
if you look in the SQL, it'd be interesting to see if the command type says it's a select statement when you're trying to run, when Oracle sees the text as a delete statement.
Yeah. Let's just say. This one, right? Oops.
Command underscore type.
So it's delete.
That's delete.
Yeah, but that's the one you translated to, go for the one you started with.
The one I started with is not in the shared pool.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
It will be an X.KGLOB.
yeah, probably. Yeah, so it just to show that FSX.
But that, I mean, it's not important. I mean, my thought was maybe on the translation, the command type didn't change, but the text said delete, the command type said select. So this is the one we wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, it looks to me like before it does anything, it says, hey, do I have a translation? If I do, then I replace the text and I just start from scratch there, right? It's not doing anything to
Can you
or
change
pretty much
an
nothing.
can you change an insert into a delete?
Say it again?
Can you change an insert into a delete?
I haven't tested an insert into a delete, but I suspect you're not going to be able to change any, one type of SQL command to another type of SQL command. Yeah. What else?
How much overhead would you say there is by having it turned on in a session?
I haven't tried to measure that, but I wouldn't think it's very much. If you're in a real high transaction sort of system, then you want to test it. But it's certainly, when you're playing around with it, you don't see any sort of noticeable lag or anything, which I wouldn't expect, right? Parsing is a lot more intensive than just replacing, one says text for another.
Is that profile persistent over a restart of the instance?
Yeah.
So it's not like a trace configuration of a trace event, it's persistent.
Yeah, there's a table that holds all those definitions and it's there. It doesn't go away.
Just wondering if only the translated command is zero zero, that means that the translation is open every time.
I'm an old rock and roll guy and my ears don't work very good.
Only the target SQL is in the individual SQL. That means that we always a miss or at least to have to do the translation every time in order to find the new text and find it already found.
I don't think so. So the question was, if the original SQL statement's not in there, does it have to reparse every single time it executes?
Or at least retranslate.
Huh?
Retranslate.
Does it have to translate it every time? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So yes, it has to translate it every time, but I think the cursor will stay there in the shared pool and it will reuse it.
Are you sure that it will retranslate? Or are you just assuming it will probably retranslate?
Well, how else would it work if it didn't translate it every time?
Well, the thought that crosses my mind is that this technology exists probably so that someone can say, I've got my SQL Server application, I will run SQL Server code against the Oracle database, and clearly, if you have to translate every single time, it cannot be scalable. Therefore, I could imagine Oracle saying, incoming statement, I've got it in the X.KGLOB, though it's invisible in v.SQL, it's pre-parsed, it's pre-translated, it's this statement which is pre-parsed, let's execute it. And it will, in effect, be a sort of double soft parse. It ought to work like that.
Otherwise, you've got
And by the way,
Oracle 6.
I missed the first bit. Does this work with bind variables?
Somebody else asked me that. I haven't actually checked it with bind variables.
Yeah, Scott may know it didn't work.
Sorry?
It didn't work.
What a way to express it is then. Yeah. And
Would it show in the trace whether it was translated in every time or not?
Well, yeah, so let's think about that for a second. If I've got an application that's passing a SQL statement in, it has to say, I know I've got that SQL statement and either I've got another cursor that I can execute or replace the SQL text, which is what I expect it probably does, replace the SQL text and then see, do I have a match, right? Don't know. It does, I'm pretty sure it reuses the cursors though, so, you know, whether it gets there by knowing what the cursor is to begin with, or whether it gets there by translating it and doing the normal stuff. If I was writing the code, I would say just replace the text and then go through my normal process that I always go through in shared pool to see if I've got, you know, I've got a representation of that SQL statement already in the shared pool or not. That's probably the way I would have done it because it's the least amount of code to write.
Have you tried this with something which isn't Oracle syntax to see if it gets you can translate from a non-Oracle SQL into Oracle?
You can translate anything to anything. You know, we could do a real quick demonstration of that. Where are we? Yes, let's say select 5 from Dual. Does that one work? So no, it appears that, you know, it's one-to-one string in case it doesn't do any sort of manipulation of case to try to, you know, make them work, right? So let's do one other thing real quick, just to look and see. Using the cursors, I think it is, but, and then we'll give up for the day. So that thing's been it's been executed 4 times, right? If I execute this thing one more time, so there's a translation. Now it's been executed 5 times. So it is reusing the cursors, right? And how it gets there, I'm not sure, but most likely, as I said, if I was writing code, I would just do the translation and do my normal lookup. No, it doesn't. So the question is, does it check the SQL syntax of my translation when I create it?
No, the original SQL that you're mapping. So is this a trick add or
Yeah, it is. So actually, I think I have one example in there that is actually something like that, right? So look one more time here and see what we got. All right, so I've got one in here that is a little bit better example. Maybe not. Let me show you a real example. So I've got a script that does a pretty bad SQL statement. Oh, you can see it there. Right, so I've got a SQL statement that does, it's joining 2 tables. Actually, it's the same table with the view, but, and there's no join condition between these 2 tables, all right? So some dumb developer, me, wrote a SQL statement and forgot to put the join condition in, all right? So I end up with a merge join Cartesian, and the thing runs for hours, all right? So I can say, let's change that. Let's say, let's say yes. That's not what I want. Okay, another one that's got the fix in, so I have to type it. So obviously not a great typing. I'm looking backwards. Okay, note to self. turn off all the screen stuff before we continue the next presentation. Well, I can't get it to work again. So take my word for it, I can do, if you look at that thing, there's a missing join condition. I can rewrite that to have the join condition in, and then replace that and run a new second track. So you can do something like, something where you got left out a join condition, or rewrite something like, if you had something written with, like a bunch of unions between a bunch of SQL statements, and you can't get the query rewrite engine to do what you want it to do in Oracle, you could actually rewrite it and replace the syntax, right? So, and the places where they're useful is if you're in production and something has slipped through the testing phase, maybe they only had 1,000 records in their test table, and a merge, Cartesian product is not a big deal, right? Because they got it distinct in the front of it anyway. Well, that could slip through a test system if they didn't have adequate data, right? So if that happens, you can replace this thing on the fly while the guys doing the code can fix the code, and redeploy. So that's kind of what it's useful for. Sorry for the screen issues. I'm not sure why I'm having so much trouble with that this morning, but yes, sir.
Do you use this on a production system?
I haven't actually used this in Anger yet. Played around with it a bunch. The DBMS rewrite, we do have, people using that to similar effect. But again, I think it's pretty flaky. Martin Nash could probably tell you more about it than I could ever do. So I think he's used it in Anger. Any other questions? I think we're about out of time, so happy to talk offline if you want.